Hi, I'm Rigger, this is You Alright, and today we're going to delve into the opening of Volume 9. Now, I'm going to keep it muted for the ease of keeping this video up, but I've got the lyrics handy should we need them, so let's dive in. So, starting off as we fall through the light orbs, we're faced with these two panels. Each of the character panels is their primary colour, and these first two I find pretty interesting, mostly because of how it's framed. I touched on this already in my thoughts video for episode 1, go check it out, but here we see Jean and Neo posed as equals. Clearly they're on opposite sides and they're aiming in different directions, but they're framed as two outcasts for this story and brought up first here. Two people separate from the core of the action, the core of the story, and they're on their own journeys, and here you see they're both filled with sadness. Obviously, Penny's blood on the broken sword is highlighted along with Jean's tears, and Jean's grief feels pretty self-explanatory, something we'll dive into while we're here. And seeing him framed this way along with Neo, someone who also has that trauma of loss, and seeing how they're framed side by side, really shows what might happen down the line of this volume, of delving into perhaps what drives them or what future they see, if any. And as we'll see later, the same goes for RWBY too, so that's three of our characters down here with strong themes of sadness and emotional baggage that we'll be diving into. And next, of course, we have Yang, Weiss, and Blake. And man, Blake's looks so awesome, mixing the actual black with that purple background. But here we see a team-like presentation. Yeah, they're facing different directions, but it's as if they were together as a team. And while they're still having developments of characters, obviously, especially the Bumblebee side of things, people are pretty excited about, it's pretty clear these aren't going to be the main focus of our volume, which is fine. They've had heavy presence in the last few volumes, especially Weiss and Yang in the most recent ones, so it's okay for them to take a back seat for a volume when we have three other characters to really focus on, especially the next one, which is RWBY. And there's a few things here. Yes, she's alone because she's our main character, she always has some solo frames and stuff in these openings, but here it really feels like we are going to be focusing on her. And, you know, she's drowning again, which is nothing new, especially we had that in the opening of last volume. So in that way, it's familiar territory. And again, the symbolism is pretty obvious. The metaphor is pretty obvious. Drowning under pressure, expectation, stress, whatever. Just drowning under the weight of it all. And just as last time, though, RWBY drowning will always have parallels to Salem drowning for me. You know, they're the two leads on each side, and they both went through this drowning, metaphorically and in a literal sense. But we know the theme of this volume for RWBY will be discovering who she really is inside, you know, who is Ruby Rose. And we get references to that as we get this silver light, but here it's very notably not from her eyes. You know, it doesn't shine from her eyes like we've seen before, it actually shines from her heart. Now, is this going into memories? Is this talking about family? We have talks of family in the lyrics of the song. A family estranged, hatred won. So is it that the light from her heart will be the light that she's given by her family, by her found family and actual family and Yang and the others? Will it be the memory of her mother? Will it be something else? Will it be her own passions or her own destiny or what she feels? So we have a lot to delve into with just that frame of what we think that's going to be. But from there, we get our anime crash behind the tree, and the red, of course, we think of RWBY and the team. But very interesting is what comes after here. So we have the crashing down to Earth, but afterward there are two blue crashes elsewhere going overhead. There are several ways to interpret that. Going by colour, perhaps it's the girl who fell through the world. Her colour scheme is that blue. But there were two here. Now, there was only one behind the tree, but it was bigger, so perhaps it was the whole team, metaphorically. They all crashed down. But if that's so, then let's assume that is Team RWBY, and that these other two perhaps could actually be Jean and Neo, who have landed elsewhere, landed separate, landed aside from everyone else. The others crashed down, but the other two went somewhere else, like, you know, on the island. Like, they landed apart from the story and are going to go on their own little journey. That could be the case. I mean, the color schemes of these dark blue and light blue, the only other times we see those colors are, you know, in the genies, you know, in the spirits in the relics, and I don't think it's them, and perhaps, what is it, the gods, you know, is a black god and the dark god? Well, usually their colors are purple and yellow, so it's not representative of them if it is their colors, but this is clearly a place made by the gods, as everything was. But as far as two lone individuals who didn't crash down with everyone else, but is here and circling the story, as it were, I think perhaps Jean and Neo are a good guess for this. Unless, of course, there's another option which I'd thought about, which is that we know there's the girl who fell through the world, but what if there were two? What if there were two characters who fell through the world? And one either got to leave or, fulfilled their story and is this good person, but maybe the other one didn't. Maybe there was a second girl who fell through the world, or a male, but we have options here. And one of them is the Red Queen. Just a thought. I'm not saying that's definitely the case, but if we have two beings circling here, it could be two people who fell, and maybe one didn't escape and one went mad. These things could have happened. Just a thought, not saying that's definitely there, but, it's an idea. But from there we have this leaf transition, and what I'd like to point out is this, because it's pretty cool. Each of these leaves has the colors of the 4 seasons on them. I'm assuming orange is summer. I mean, orange could be autumn as well, but I think we'll just go for purple. But yeah, orange like a hot color like summer, purple for autumn/fall, blue over there for winter, and green for spring. Is this magic leaves that it's every season here because we've seen how the weather works, it's not consistent? Or is it perhaps alluding to something more, like Oz's children or the first 4 maidens? Who knows? But it's here and I noticed it. This leaf has all 4 colors of the seasons on it. And that really might be worth noting more than just the world is magic. Maybe it is tying into those things. Especially since it's on leaves, and there's something we've seen me references to maidens, especially Pyrrha. So, this returning leaf motif, but with these colors, really speaks to maybe there's something more to this. Maybe there is links to Oz down here. Maybe there is links to magic down here. So, it could be quite interesting. Just wanted to point it out. And next we go through the team evolution, and there isn't really much to say here until we get to RWBY. Because unlike her teammates, she's not walking forwards but lagging behind, which will become a recurring theme, and her being overlaid by the girl who fell through the world again, which will be another theme that will continue, which is RWBY following in her footsteps, of RWBY clearly repeating this cycle or being the next. So then we move on to having RWBY crying and the rain falling, and as we say, we've already seen that in the episode 1, that the weather responded to RWBY's emotions and it rained as she cried. Which means maybe this isn't just the story of the girl who fell through the world. Maybe this isn't just the story of a girl with a lot of problems. Maybe this is the story of a girl who cried a river and drowned the whole world. Is that what we're thinking? Absolutely. But also, on this frame, I'd like to say that the rain in this red tint in RWBY's red lighting also has this raining blood imagery, which is just kind of cool. Even if unintentional, though it feels intentional. RWBY's tear then leads to Crescent Rose. The abundance of that seems like it's going to be a big deal, the abundance of Crescent Rose in this, and the fact that it's missing is going to be a big sticking point in this volume. And perhaps even, like a tear, she'll shed it completely by the end. Maybe she'll no longer use Crescent Rose. Maybe she will move past it to something else. Or maybe it will just be the quest to find it. Maybe it will eventually remind her who she is, remind her of her purpose, take her back to where she started and why she undertook what she did. Why she started this journey in the first place, and who her idols were. Maybe all of that will come full circle, and it will come in the form of her weapon. Who knows, just an idea. But from there, we get our lovely birds heading through to the lovely mice, before the smith's hammer comes crashing down. So, freezing here, on the hammer there is an emblem that really looks familiar. Was it a dust symbol, or something like that? It feels really familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. The closest I had was this from the World of Remnant on Dust, and that's not quite it either. Also, in this micro frame, she seems to be hammering and forging some kind of sword. It definitely has the tip of a sword. So that definitely feels like it might be something for Jean, be that reforging what he had or giving him something new. And we do need a Vorpal sword in this story for the Jabberwocker after all. So that could be it. It's not exactly something given away in this opening, but something I was thinking is that I think characters like the Smith and some of these other characters are going to be people that might run into multiples of our team. So, not just running into Team RWBY, but they might have run into Jean earlier or before and run into Neo. There might be sort of touchstones in our world that multiple people will meet at different points. Just an idea. Because it feels like a lot of these characters could have reference and a lot of them could have value to multiple characters who are, at least at this point, traveling separately. Because we have Jean that needs a new weapon, we have RWBY that's lost her weapon and might need a replacement, and, not outside of the obvious, there are multiple like touchstones in the story that multiple characters might run into. And that continues into the next character, which is the raccoon. And having them both on screen like this really makes them feel like, again, they're going to be touchstones. They're going to be people that we interact with more than once. They're going to be merchants, people we can buy resources from, and people we need to rely on. Perhaps even people we need to find things to trade with so that we can get ahead in our journey. The only other thing in the frame here is the lion, which looks like a toy or a puppet, although that seems to fit with some of the aesthetics we've already seen. As for what the jar is, there's no point speculating. Next we have our red queen, or queen of hearts, with her pieces. Again, there's not much to say right now. There's a bit of a focus on eye color, though, I've noticed. Like, obviously, she has the deep red, and then we see Cheshire's piercing blue open, and later we'll see Caterpillar, who also has, like, burning blue eyes. Obviously, eye colors have always been important in RWBY to a degree, but these creatures of Ever After seem to have these really big, prominent colored eyes. And I don't know if we should be reading into that or not, or whether it's just a good, expressive way to show them. Next, after Crescent Rose Shatters, we go to a storybook, and into the team and the girl who fell through the world. And this is where, again, that motif returns of the team following in her footsteps as they run through the different areas of the storybook, which are different areas in Ever After. We have the Queen's Guard and so forth. She has come before them. So despite not being available to talk to here, she has done this journey before, and the team have to follow in her footsteps, follow her path, perhaps to escape. Which would imply that the story is true and she did actually return from the world already. And if that is so, you can see again that the team is following and they're having to increasingly run faster and faster, but RWBY is dropping further and further behind. So again, we have that struggle for RWBY to keep up and find her way and find her place in this story. Also, shout out to the big unicorn and the barrel of monkeys, that's great. Also, Cheshire dances through here, but that's not surprising, he can turn up anywhere and does. And he pops up again in our next section, where we meet the hookah-smoking caterpillar. So I'm really glad that's what this character ended up being, because we only saw him from the top up in the trailer. And I have to say, this is the guy I'm most interested in. We've seen scenes of RWBY having these visions going through, like a spiritual journey covered in fog, and I'm putting my bets that this is this guy's job. That's why he's in the story. And he even has a third eye in the middle of his head, so symbolism here seems pretty obvious. We're going to be delving into visions and going on a vision quest or a journey. Though he's definitely coded like a bad guy from what we've seen, at least in the trailer, unless he's angry at someone else. So that could be a very interesting dynamic to play with, so he really has my attention here. For a volume that seems like it's going to be focused on the inner turmoil of characters, he's the gateway into seeing the visions of what's inside characters, it seems. So very much someone to pay attention to. And then we have a very interesting section. Jean here becomes a silhouette, as instead behind him, time is highlighted, faces of clocks. Now, when it comes to Alice in Wonderland, time is weird how it plays into the story. Like, it's all over the place and sort of not. Like, there's the character in the Burton films that is actually time, but let's count that out because it's just the movies. But we have the White Rabbit being late, wearing a clock, about the idea of time. But then when they wind up at the Hatter's party, it's almost happening all the time, so what's the point? And then seemingly no time passes for Alice while she dreams and is in Wonderland. There's all these things, but I'm not sure if any of those exactly refer to how this is going to play out. But I think that there may be a chance, see this, with Jean becoming a shadow of himself in front of time, that maybe he is being affected by time. And there's a few ways this could play out. Remembering that Wonderland is weirdness and the rules don't have to make sense, so like who landed first doesn't actually matter because he could have gone through any wonky way. Perhaps even Jean has been here a lot longer than them. That could be something, that Jean has been here for years maybe. And he's gone mad with the grief, he's been alone. That could be a thing, we don't know yet. We have no reason to think that'll be a thing, but this frame, it's Jean fading into a silhouette of himself as all the faces of a clock are lit up behind him. And it's almost like logically saying that he will be involved in time, and it probably won't be a good thing. That he'll become a shadow of himself as time eats him up. But that might also mean that it hasn't happened already, that it's going to. That perhaps this is his vision of the future. That after losing Pyrrha and costing Penny, and perhaps other things that are to come, that this knight in armor and flames, this spirit of vengeance and pain with his face hidden and battle-scarred, that is his future. That's the path he's on. That's who he will be. That if in the story he isn't that already, that's what he may become. And I know that might seem like a stretch, but think about it. We saw Jean in the opening being very, very sad at the very start, and then we haven't seen him since. And then now he gets one page dedicated to himself, and it's him becoming a shadow and like time lighting up behind him all over the place. There's a lot of ways you could read that, but none of them seem good. From there, we go to this maze in the sky, which seems pretty obvious, both in its MC-eshness, which we're referring to that again, and references to the portals from whence they came. Is this literal? Perhaps it's not. It's searching for a way out. It's mirroring them trying to find a way out of, Atlas and all that. But here they're running through these crazy paths in ways that don't make sense to find the way out of here, and there is no seeming correct answer. It's just maze-like and goes on forever with all these doors. And that might be metaphorical, or perhaps it is literal. Perhaps they find a place like this. Perhaps these are the branches of the tree and they go every which way and there's a door at the end of every one of them, but only one of them leads out of here, and maybe it's not even one you can see. It could be symbolic, it could be literal, but it seems like the symbology of it is pretty obvious, with just the team running all over the place trying to find a logical way out of this illogical world. Simple enough. But it's here again where we move from RWBY, and from RWBY to following in the footsteps of the girl. And we've seen this bridge too, notably. We saw Yang on it in the trailer. And it seems like then it might be a real place. This one seems like it's a real thing. And notably here, we see RWBY smile. And not just smile, but big smile and happily jump. Now, that could be metaphorical, that could be literal. It has me thinking a few things. One of which is a leap of faith, that this is a test and she has to jump. The other is that it's fake, that perhaps this isn't RWBY at all, that this smiling person is actually Neo in disguise, smiling at someone as they drop to their supposed death, as a way to hurt others. If she disguised herself as RWBY and jumped off in front of Yang, what would that do to her? I mean, diving off a cliff has other metaphorical meanings too, like losing one's mind. Perhaps she's gone crazy and her smile's just overtaken her because she's completely lost it. Perhaps that is a possibility. Especially with your head literally in the clouds and on a bridge perhaps that you can't cross, or a bridge you refuse to cross. There's lots of ways to read that. And I'm not sure any are necessarily correct. But one interesting one is with the RWBY dropping and perhaps it being fake, is because she becomes sugar for Neo, and, maybe she can take that jump as RWBY to get to Yang or something like that, and it's part of a plan, hence why it becomes, the sweet additive, the sugar to her tea, that lovely, little extra. It's literally making her revenge sweet. And yes, we have Neo and her Technicolor tea, which perhaps quite fittingly then frames her as our Mad Hatter in this story, which is probably how it should be. But this next part is very interesting to me, however, as Neo is framed here in the spotlight and flanked by silhouettes. So, metaphorically, I'd read that exactly as is. She's literally in the spotlight now. She's not anyone else's henchman. She's not in the shadows. She's not standing behind anyone else now. She's the boss. And I'd be happy to leave it there, but it made me think about these silhouettes. I don't think we're going to see these people. I don't think there's going to be a big group of followers to pop up for Neo. It doesn't really make sense, because why would all these human characters be around? And even if they are, why are we going to get introduced to them all? And why there's so many and we don't have time to fight them all, and it's too much. So who are these people? Because these silhouettes seem too important. They're too, specific. They're not just generic people. And the other thing I thought is maybe it's a flash of the future. Maybe this is a gang that she will be. She will become the boss in the future. That's who she finds out she's going to be. No, a follower no more. She's going to lead her own thing. Maybe. And that's an idea. It's just that these silhouettes, they're just too specific. I mean, maybe they're all people from her past, and people that she's overcome, maybe. Look, this one here looks like Cinder. Just because of the height and the way they're standing. Maybe that's Cinder. The one directly behind Neo in the funky stance perhaps could be Roman. That's something he would do. And this woman has a notable head shape, but I don't know her. Looks maybe like an older lady with that hairstyle. Neo's mother and father either side of her, perhaps, standing behind her proud. That could be a thing. I mean, the one has her hand resting on Neo's chair. Literally a supportive pose. It should be someone she knows or trusts, and there definitely isn't anyone down here like that we know of. And even if there are dead people down here, it'd just be weird. So this must be someone important. My other guesses, and they are guesses, is like this one over here behind the maybe Cinder could be Tyrion, just from the pants into the boot shape. That's all I've got, and there's no tail that I can see, but it could be behind. Which would make no sense. There's no reason Tyrion would be down here, and he wouldn't be loyal to Neo because he's loyal to Salem. And even if it was a vision, it's like, you know, the only time she had a showdown with him was just when he got in her face once, so that doesn't make sense. But I'm trying to find who all these people could possibly be, and I did, you know, scroll around a little bit in the depths of RWBY, like some side characters, some back characters, you know. I double checked what the Malachites look like, and Little Miss Malachite too, because Neo had a run in with her. On the side that could be Cinder, and I don't think is Tyrion, but could be, but like wouldn't make sense. That also could be what's back there, and then that would be those three. But again, I don't know why they'd be back there unless she's just picturing herself leading them all. And same goes on this side. Like, I don't know, although this shot of this woman with this notable silhouette here, it almost looks like herself in the past because it's so short and has that sort of, you know, triumphant stance. Either that or it's Penny. It actually looks like Penny somehow with like long hair and hands on her hips. I don't know. And the other thing I was thinking is, let's assume it's none of those. That it's maybe Neo's previous disguises, people she's used to get ahead, but that would seem weird too. And I'm not sure, it's just that these seem way too specific. These seem like actual people and characters. And I can't think of that many people turning up for Neo. The only other thing I would think is perhaps these are the court of the Red Queen. Like perhaps Neo's gonna kill the Red Queen by the end of this and take her court for herself and sit at the head like this. That could be something. That she could sit front and center like this, and maybe even Neo will end up leading down here and stay behind as the others go, and she could rule this court. That might be a thing. And if I'm gonna pick, I guess that seems the most likely, just with the pieces we have in front of us. Though Neo's motion at the end here, it looks like she's agreeing to an evil deal or something. So who knows? Maybe she's agreeing with the Red Queen, but then why would she have these people? I don't know. It's a very confusing one, but I'm very interested to know where it goes. Oh, and the only reason I say the one in the middle also could be Roman is because the light is positioned in such a way that you can't see his head. So if it was Roman, it would be more obvious if you could see his hair and his head. Even if the hat wasn't there, like the way his head would be smoothed over and the hair would come down in front of his eye would really give it away. And it seems like they've hidden that person, particularly with the light. So the fact he's sort of in a weirder stance and right in the middle behind her, that really gives me the feeling that could be Roman, but I don't know where he would come in unless, you know, there's afterlife and stuff down here. We thought about that before, but that was my only other bit of evidence for that. Next we have the storybook, and I went through it frame by frame, and there isn't a whole lot to see. On this edge, what looks to be the tree, as if you were drawing a diagram just with the ground sort of running out and the roots coming out from the ground. Further flipping through, we get the girl again, and she's talking to a cat, presumably Cheshire, because this is just Alice in Wonderland. And then that gets taken over by the Jabberwocker, which makes me think perhaps they're connected, that maybe he would at least know what happened to her. I will say, in the episode, him talking how he did made me think of something. The jabbering to himself and narrating what he's doing, no, despite not being exactly the same, was reminiscent to me of the Hound when it was repeating the, you know, fetch the girl or whatever it was, the specific orders given to it by Salem. So it's like a bestial thing that was repeating what it was doing. That was the only sort of connection I saw, which means maybe that the girl didn't escape and she is this thing, that she was twisted and molded into this beast now, and that's actually what happened to her. I don't know, I'm not convinced, but write it down because it also looks like that thing is wearing almost a mask. So if it was sort of the equivalent of the Hound down here, or a reflection of it, just an interesting thought. Because that was something else that I thought about, that down here is sort of a reflection of what's going on. You have people like, you know, the helpless villagers who are like the mice, who are like the average people who need help. And then you have the beasts roaming the land, just grim or whatever, but instead down here it's the Jabberwocker, who is the reflection of the Hound, this semi-sentient beast on a mission. Then you have the person who's directing all the chess pieces, this crazed evil being with a white face at the top, even a cracked white face that we see. And that is your Salem equivalent, but down here it's the Red Queen. Just an idea. I don't think that is the thing, but I do like that idea as just this weird reflection of everything going on up top. and she's in charge of all her pawns, who are here the Grimm. Anyway, lastly, before this book closes, we get a very odd picture in the back here. It's an animal on like a thick piece of timber, or perhaps a stone in the water, I think. It sort of looks like a little dog standing on its hind legs, or some kind of mouse, and is looking at this spiral structure in the reeds. It's like some kind of tower or marker. It looks like it has a flower bulb on top. And it really obviously makes me think of this. So the scale is very, very different. The whole floating across to get to the tower with the flower on top. So perhaps that's what that is. It's the storybook equivalent of this happening, but obviously it's portrayed on different scales. So I think that's what that is. And perhaps it's telling part of the journey to get out, because it comes after we see the girl meeting Cheshire in the storybook. So that's something to note. And then it goes up in flames, our book of fables with the tree on it we've seen before in the fairy tale stories. And it burns, which, yeah, it kind of feels like that. Things are going that way. And that goes up to the Jean Hell Knight, which we discussed earlier. Though again, as if he were forged out of these burning fairy tales, out of the things that never were. You know, if it was Jean, he never got his fairy tale ending, it all fell apart and burned and made him this, maybe. But from there, we have the team sprinting up the impossible tree, and then we're hit with this. It looks like they're being blown away, although when you remember the way they're running, perhaps it's not a gust and it's more like gravity flipping on them and now they're falling. So that could be a couple things. We have heard in the trailer you can't just go to the tree, so it's impossible to climb the tree. You just get knocked back down. That's not the point of the tree. Although, it also feels like something else, because we have these leaves whipping through and that big gust almost of wind and then blowing them back. It actually really makes me think of this scene again, of the evil team versus Amber when we first see the maiden powers revealed. I'm not saying it is that, but it just feels very similar the way this is done. So maybe that is the case, and maybe the girl fell through the world is one of the maidens, or something like that. Because again, it goes along with the leaf and the four color of the seasons, so maybe. And again, we have references to her tree in the lyrics, so is she the tree, or is it her tree that she planted, or is she in the tree? You know, there's lots of ways to interpret that, but if the tree is connected to her, and the leaves are connected to it, and then the leaves have the color of the seasons, and they have this image that's kind of like when we saw a maiden revealed. Just little things that feel like they could mean something, or maybe we're just reading into it too much. I can't tell. But from there, RWBY falls through a big painting, so let's go step by step. First is a jackalope, the horned rabbit, and not actually in the Alice in Wonderland story, but a creature that gets associated with fairy tales and, you know, weirdness and legends a lot. And it makes me think of the god of animals, actually, for some reason, with the horns on the antlers on the fur. And the Jean Knight is petting it, or standing with it. Is he in league with it? Is it his steed? If it is his steed, it's probably more than that. It's definitely drawn to have, like, intelligence and wisdom. It's got, you know, wise, shining eyes, and it's looking straight at the viewer. It has clear, bright eyes as well, especially opposed to the knight beside it with the hidden eyes you can't see the intentions of. Perhaps it's whispering in his ear, perhaps it's given him a mission or purpose. It's hard to tell. I don't know if we're meant to interpret that's actually something we'll find down here, or if it's just representative of fairy tales in general. And I also find it interesting that the knight's armor here that we can see is scuffed and scratched. It's not new. He's been through battles again and again. And remember that time thing we talked about, maybe, perhaps it already being through time, or a vision of time to come, of all these battle scars to come, perhaps. And as we have a closer look, then we go past the Red Queen, or the Queen of Hearts, depending what they're going to call her, and the chess game. Again, not too much we can gleam. You know, it sort of speaks for itself. We don't know much about the characters, so we can't really do much with it. Next, we have the image of the girl being looked over by Cheshire again, and very importantly, the shadow behind her. It seems very likely that this is who she is now, / who she grew up to be. That if she's somewhere else, or if she's long dead by time, who knows, she grew up like this, to have her hair cut and wear glasses. I racked my brain just in case to see if we'd seen this person. I even checked back through the fairy tales, and the closest I got was this huntsman's child, though the hair is very different, but then again, these are tales, so maybe they're just told wrong. I don't know, but that's the closest I could get. But we should look out for people that look like this in the future. You know, woman, short hair, and the glasses, the round frames. So yeah, we should look out for her. And of course, she's in our beloved magic mirror. Mirror, mirror, as always. And the caterpillar again, but no new information. But then we get our first full view of the smith. And there's a few notable things here. It seems to be a good chance that she is perhaps a forged person. Perhaps not human at all, or human no longer. There's these replaced sections of the face. These arms that don't look like they could house real flesh. Like, they're not armor, but instead literally forged metal arms to replace arms or to be the arms that never were there. Something that I talked about a long time ago when I first saw her. And something that really could mean a whole host of things. It could mean that this is someone so ancient and so old that they've built a body to continue living. Or simply another kind of being that was forged into existence. This was never a person, it was a created thing made by a creator that carried on to forge more things. You know, it was built and then it continued building. It's very curious. And another thing I was thinking though, we've talked before and I've put my bet on this being Summer Rose. And I don't know how she could have got here. And you would think this means I'm wrong because, it doesn't look like her. But it did make me think of something. Remember how we and RWBY sort of thought that if Summer got captured, she became, a hound or an experiment. Do you remember what happened to that guy? That his eyes were scarred from where his silver eye sort of protected him and allowed him to merge with this thing, is what we hypothesize. And when it died, he had no flesh on his bones. It burned away, and he was just left with a skeletal hand, as if all the flesh under there had been completely destroyed. Well, if that happened to Summer, but she didn't die, let's look at this statue again. Replacement arms, as if the ones she had were no longer functional, as if all the flesh had been taken off and they were just bone. And then replacement panels over her eyes, as if they too were gone. Her eyes were perhaps completely taken out of her skull or dead, or all the skin around them was, and she had to replace it with parts. Rather than wearing like a visor or a mask, perhaps it's like pieces of her face were replaced, pieces of her body were replaced, because she was in a position like the Hound. All her body was completely riddled, and she's just this forged being now, or mostly forged. There's not much skin left, except perhaps under her chest plate and for the rest of her face. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying when I was looking at this, I thought that is totally possible as well. The questions as to how she got down here, I couldn't hope to answer if that is the case, but just something I thought worth thinking, that because this statue is in like bronze here, it doesn't give any of those details away. It doesn't give away skin color, hair color, it doesn't give away exactly what's skin, what's not, and we can't actually tell yet. So I think that's really cool and just something to maybe look out for. But from there we fall past the Jabberwocker again, but no new info, and another bit of Cheshire again, but again, no new info. But all of this is then spewing from Neo, and that's very interesting. Now, we've heard a bit about Neo's childhood and trivia and all of that, and of all this, of all these things above being held in the shattering pink from Neo, like one of her illusions above her head, and she's at the base, it feels like it's something that could just be an artistic interpretation, or something you could really read into and draw crazy conclusions from. Like, it ranges from insanity, like, Neo is the key to the world and it didn't exist until Neo thought it up, and all this came from her imagination somehow, and, this girl who fell through the world is like a mirror of Trivia, who is like the other side of herself, who she cast out, or something crazy like that, right? Because she's at the base and she turns into the girl who fell through the world in the transition. Like, that's nuts. But, you could read that way. It was very extreme. Or it could be that, just like this painting, perhaps the story will all come down to Neo. All these things we fall down, in the end, it will come down to Neo and what she chooses to do. It will have a huge impact on the story. The truth that she chooses to see, perhaps. That after this journey through all these things and past all this craziness at the base will be Neo, and the decision she makes or the truth she finds in her journey here will direct where this story goes next for the rest of the team. Whether that be she becomes an ally, or we have to kill her, or whatever it might be. And I think that either way, it does suggest that she'll be a key player here, although we sort of have had that suggested to us by other things already. And then, through a cool transition that we can read into or not, for now let's choose to not to just continue for now, she becomes the girl who fell through the world. But from there, we see that girl get up and walk the same path Ruby did as Crescent Rose washes up behind her. Again, Ruby metaphorically is following in her footsteps again. She walked this path before, and now Crescent Rose, aka Ruby, has washed up to follow it again. And then we have Created by Monty, and we're out. So that is the opening to Volume 9. Lots to read into, and crazy theories you could make, and also, it's just cool and looks really good and is a really nice opening. And we've seen previously that not everything is to be read into, not everything is for certain, and then some things here are really just to sort of illustrate a thematic tone. Those things are more obvious, like following the footsteps, etc. Some of the smaller details for sure will come into clarity as things go along. However, without context, of course, all that stuff can be difficult to impossible. And I feel a lot of this will make more sense once we meet at least some of these people for the first time, especially people like the Smith and the Caterpillar. That will help really give us a direction on how things might go. But for now, that's what we've got to go on. Neo's connection to everything is really interesting, especially considering the path she's taken to get here as a character. The fact she really only returned by popular demand in Volume 6, and now she seems to be central to this volume, no matter how you read things. She's a key player down here and an enemy down here. That's very important. And the absolute lack of presence of anyone else in the intro is also very interesting, like anyone from Remnant. Like, there's not even a symbolic Oz or Salem off to the side overarching things. So that says we're probably going to be here all volume, like no more other Remnant. That's what I'm thinking. Like, absolutely nothing from Remnant. It'll leave us here, but that leaves us a lot of room to play with to really dive into what's plaguing Jean and Neo, as well as secondary characters, as well as the main line, which is RWBY. So if we're down for a character story, which I very much am, and we're down for character development, which I very much am, this really seems like a promising volume in this fanciful, wonderful backdrop, behind it with all this cool visual style. So it should be really cool. But that's all for now for the visuals. As for the lyrics to the song, posted up by Casey, there's lots to talk about, especially a talk of being undone, discovering a new self, fear of losing who we are. Those things are pretty obvious with everything else we've done. But the second half gets really interesting. Why should I fight to connect with the world I cannot exhume? Now that's pretty crazy indeed, this idea that RWBY might have this resistance, perhaps even a resentment of the world, and that's kind of fair, especially if we start talking about how the gods did things. And perhaps that this change and resentment to her life, she feels this resentment of the family she never had, a family estranged here, hello Summer, what she'd give in exchange to be happy without trying. That's a big thing, that she is sad all the time and she has to try to be happy, to seek it out at all times, otherwise it's overwhelming. And, she worries if she'll lose her mind. That poor mental state mentioned all through this song. And lastly, there is the To Her tree again. So is the tree her? Is she literally there, the girl we're here to find? Or perhaps, or follow in the footsteps of? And metaphorically perhaps then, is she the tree, meaning RWBY? Is RWBY meant to find within herself who she is, and that means finding the tree? It becomes her tree, and then her way out. It's certainly worth a question, much more of a metaphorical approach, if so. But, outside of being on a metaphorical note, for a literal one, that's all for now. Until next time, my name is Rigger. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.